Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the La Pradera Lot 1 Wash Process Colombia from Little Wolf Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Little Wolf, based out of Ipswich, Massachusetts. And this is our May 2023 Coffee of the Month, as it was voted on by you guys as the coffee you most wanted to see us review. And this coffee was originally brought to our attention by Andy. So shout out to and thank you to Andy for the suggestion. Little Wolf is a coffee roaster that has appeared on this channel multiple times before. And while they are a coffee roaster I do enjoy, I have been a little underwhelmed by the coffees we've reviewed from them in the past. And that's a little surprising given that on paper they're a coffee roaster I should enjoy a lot more than I have, given that they do roast on the ProBat, one of if not my favorite roasting machines in the entire world. And they do roast on the slightly lighter side of things relative to a lot of other American coffee roasters. So I've definitely wanted to go back and try more of their coffees. And once this coffee was announced as our coffee of the month, we did receive a lot of feedback from people saying they'd been a little underwhelmed by this one. So I definitely wanted to try it for myself and see what I felt about this one. Looking forward to discussing it, as this right here is day 31. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe, which is a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee, as I alluded to, it's on the slightly lighter side of things relative to a lot of other American coffee roasters. Even then, I wouldn't say that it's an overly light coffee. I feel like most people would closely align this with maybe the lighter side of a light medium in terms of that roast profile. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 10, first impression, and ran it through the V60, and the cup was coming out a fair bit more bright than initially expected, as it felt like there was a little bit of an undefined citric acidity to the cup. Perhaps it was a little bit early, and that's the first impression I took away, was that this coffee wasn't ready to be consumed yet, as there was a very slight candied aspect in the finish, but I wasn't pulling out too much more from this one. Not necessarily the best first impression. We continue on to day 12 as I ran it through the Chemex, and once again some pretty similar results, as there was an immediate brightness right off the brew with a slight graham cracker-like quality to the cup. It does have a slight bit of complexity, as there was an herbal florality and a long-lasting raw sugar taste to the cup. So once again, not necessarily the best second impression, but we continue on to day 14 as I ran it through the April dripper. And it was the best day of the coffee up to this point, as there was a little bit more sweetness and the cup overall felt a little bit more even in general. There is a fair bit of the sugar candy sweetness at the forefront, but much more vibrancy to the cup all around, so it definitely made for the best experience up to that point. We continue on to day 17 as I attempted some higher temps with this coffee, and that didn't necessarily yield the most positive results. First time around on this day, tried it with the V60, and the coffee honestly just felt like it was over extracted, as there was more of an undefined citric aspect yet again. But at this time I would say it was even more undefined than some of the previous experiences. There was a little bit of a candied sweetness in the finish yet again, but I was really struggling with the V60 up to this point, and continued on to day 20, and I made the same adjustments just to kind of verify that it was the adjustments I had made and not necessarily the coffee itself. But once I did, I had similar results with the Chemex, as I felt that this coffee definitely required some slightly lower temperatures, as there was an undefined brightness to the cup. Yet again, slightly vegetal with a slight graham cracker sweetness and more of an undefined citric brightness. So once again, not necessarily enjoying it. But here on day 22, reverted back to the standard recipe, and this coffee honestly felt like day and night. This one did feel a little sensitive, as with the adjustments, there was definitely an improved cup with a slight bit more brightness, but a lot of sugary candy sweetness. The listed mango for the first time felt like a very apt note within this coffee, as it can be felt in a slightly more sugary stone fruit sense. An overall much better day. Really enjoyed this day 22 mark. That kind of sets the benchmark for the coffee going forward, as on day 24, made the same adjustments through the Chemex and was seeing similar results, as it had greatly improved with the Chemex. And that did verify my first impressions of this coffee, and I felt that it wasn't quite ready to be consumed yet. But day 22 and day 24 definitely confirmed that, as with the same recipe we had started with, the coffee was much improved. So this one just needed a fair bit of rest before it really started to open up. But on this day, I could say that it was the most defined it had been, as well as pretty layered, as there was a citric apple brightness to the cup right before it transitions into a sugary candy sweetness. Slightly tart, but also so much of that candied sweetness that it really enjoyed and kind of balanced out that part of the coffee. And day 27 ran it through the V60, and the cup that really solidified it for me on this day. Felt like it had finally reached the full potential as it was present in terms of the brightness, but it was extremely well defined as there was a bright tart apple, and it was very reminiscent of what I would describe as a Granny Smith, and that was also complemented by a sugary candied sweetness that was reminiscent of a Jolly Rancher. So I could say that this was maybe like a green apple Jolly Rancher. That's how much sweetness I was getting from this one, and it was quite enjoyable. In addition to that, it felt like it was best slightly above room temperatures, as there was plenty of that sugariness in terms of the stone fruit sense, but an overall nice day. Really enjoyed the experience I'd had from this one. Definitely felt like I got the best from this coffee. All right, well, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. All right, and we have a handful of level 4s. So let's start with the cleanliness level 4. I don't think that there's too much to say on that. I feel like on the later days when I was able to get a lot more definition and clarity within this coffee, it definitely justified that level 4 mark. But even then, we have a wash processed Colombian coffee. It's almost always going to reach that level 4 mark. So not too much to say on that. The finish, level 4. Yes, once again, it's going to be really surprising if that reached any other level than that level 4. There was a fair bit of that strict brightness that was long lasting, and also a fair bit of that candied aspect that was quite long lasting. But even then, it's right there, right in line with that level 4 mark. Not much to say on that. Sweetness, that's been in line with the last couple of things I had mentioned. Yes, it very much has that level 4 mark. This one, I think, is the first level of coffee that I could say was in line with my expectations for the sweetness I had for them. So that right there was really nice. I'm very happy with the sweetness that was present within this one. The acidity, level 4. Yes, and I think that that might have to do a little bit with the variety that was listed in this one. This one is a pink bourbon coffee, which was one of the selling points to me on this coffee as well. Definitely had a fair bit of that apple-like brightness to the cup that was present very early on, but it was something that was persistent throughout the entirety of the time drinking this one. So a little bit brighter, also kind of alluded to the roast profile in this coffee earlier. Citrus fruit, level 4, yes, and that's why I do find it kind of interesting that they don't have anything along those lines listed as one of their notes, but of course that's why notes are only a guide, as the most dominant factor for me was that apple-like brightness to this cup, and given that I can only put that in the citrus fruit category, that was the best place for me to chart that, so level 4 felt really good for that. We have a bunch of level 3s. We will start with the body, level 3. Yes, this one had a fair bit of texture. No part of that is surprising given the processing method as well as given the brew method as well as the origin within the coffee. So it was always going to be a little bit more textured, a little bit more medium bodied of a cup of coffee. Florality, level 3. That's something I haven't mentioned too much in this review, but there was a nice floral component that did complement the rest of the other sweet aspects within this one. So a little bit of an underrated part of this coffee. I definitely feel like that's justified. Berry fruit, level 3, yes, I could say that it was a slightly more tart berry that was present within this one, and that's something that I wasn't necessarily expecting going into it, but it was a nice complementary factor to it. Stone fruit, level 3, yes, and I think one of the notes that they have listed on here, honestly, I forgot what the notes they have. I think it's juicy, taffy, and mango, and I can definitely see the mango. I can see a little bit of the juiciness given the body, and then the taffy I can see given that there was so much of that kind of like raw sugar sweetness within this one. But the stone fruit, I think that's maybe the fruit factor I was expecting to experience most within this one. And while it was there, I feel like the apple that I was experiencing was a lot more pronounced within this one. So that's why that still charts at the level 3, but it was distinct enough to justify that mark. Chocolate, level 3. Yes, I think that goes in line with the florality. It kind of had this like floral chocolate aspect that was present within it for a lot of the time drinking it. So I'm actually quite happy with that being there. Caramel, level 3. Oftentimes I like to just kind of lump candied aspects within coffee into that caramel category, as it felt like the best spot to put it. And given that it just felt very sugary, I think that's the best way I can go back. It wasn't necessarily that kind of classic Probat brown candied sweetness that I typically experience from that roasting machine. It was just more of this generic sugary, like raw sugary sweetness overall. So that right there definitely justified, well, that's where I put the level 3, so it doesn't necessarily fit in that, but that's kind of the best place I could find for this. And honestly, I feel like this is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. I don't think that there's too much else worth discussing within this tasting wheel. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I feel like I have a lot, so I'm going to try to summarize this as quickly as I can. First things first, this is a pink bourbon coffee, which I said was one of the selling points to me on it right from the start. And that Fabrininco I had from Flower Child was so amazing that I feel like it set the bar really high for future pink bourbon Colombian coffees that we are going to be reviewing this year. This one at the end was very nice. That day 27 mark was really positive. Here I am on day 31, and I feel like it's another really positive day. So I think this is one of those coffees where it might get a little bit of the benefit that the last couple of cups I'd had from it were really nice, especially compared to some of the earlier days where this wasn't necessarily the most impressive coffee. I could tell that this one was pretty sensitive, and it was a little bit finicky in general, as some adjustments really yielded significantly different results with the way that the cup was coming out. So that wasn't necessarily the best part of it, but I think as of this moment, this is my favorite Little Wolf coffee that I have reviewed from them on this channel up to this point. So that's a really positive part of this one. But other than that, I would say that maybe didn't quite live up to some very high expectations I had for it going into it. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you definitely like your apple-like brightness, I feel like this one's going to be very much skewed in that direction, as it's one of the first things I'd mentioned and something that was present throughout. But it's complemented very well by a lot of that sugary sweetness, which was my favorite part of this coffee. Once you do kind of experience that in a secondary manner, that's at times a little bit more subtle, but you can also experience it as something that's most present within the cup itself, then it can be a very positive experience coupled with that very noticeable brightness as well. In addition to that, as I've kind of mentioned, they do have a slightly lighter profile, so people that do drink American coffees may be a little bit more in line with that light medium scale, but looking for something a little lighter, I feel like this is a good gateway coffee, a good transition coffee. Even if this one was a little difficult to work with, if you can get it right, then I feel like you can experience some really high positives within this one. I think that's just kind of the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the La Pradera Lot 1 Wash Process Colombia from Little Wolf Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.